So as you take a look at the agenda for this morning, I'd like to mention that we will continue to host the Permitting Playbook webinars quarterly as consistent updates are being made based on your feedback and suggestions. So we appreciate all of the input that you've provided thus far. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and start with our first speaker. I'd like to give a warm welcome to Scott Adams, Deputy Director, Office of Broadband and Digital Literacy. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Jolia, and thank you to the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development for your ongoing partnership on looking at ways to enhance permitting to support broadband deployment throughout the state. That's a critical part of the state's Broadband for All program. I want to welcome our local and municipal participants as well to this process. We, appreciate your partnership and efforts to enhance permitting across the state. Next slide, please. So real quick as a primer, we wanted to make sure to underscore that this local broadband deployment and permitting effort is really under the auspices of Broadband for All. And hopefully everyone knows that Broadband for All is the state's overarching program to close the digital divide and foster digital equity throughout the state. Really, the Broadband for All has been an evolution that began with the development of the state California Broadband Council, which is a multi-agency body that coordinates broadband deployment and adoption throughout the state in un- and unserved areas, is determined by the California Public Utilities Commission. The work of the Broadband Council was further informed during the pandemic when the Governor Newsom issued his broadband executive order and directed the Broadband Council to establish a statewide broadband action plan. That action plan was developed in just 4 months with input from over 700 stakeholder entities and completed in December of 2020. One of the real critical pieces is that the action plan directed, knowing that supporting ongoing deployment of broadband infrastructure, the Broadband Action Plan directed the Department of Technology to work with other entities to find ways to enhance permitting at all levels of government to support broadband deployment. Some additional steps: we created the Broadband for All portal, which is tied to the Broadband Action Plan, and it's where we have posted the local permitting playbook. I think you all know that as Broadband for All evolved, Senate Bill 156 was really an historic and seminal piece of legislation to support Broadband for All, how it set the structure and framework and allocated billions of dollars of funding to support the Middle Mile Broadband Initiative, which is led by the Department of Technology, and included billions of dollars to go to complementary last mile programs that really are intended to support internet service providers and eligible entities to leverage that funding to develop last mile solutions to connect back to the middle mile. Want to make sure that we also call out that there are many other state efforts, including the PUC's existing last mile and adoption programs, and we are very much want to call out that while the state is doing its part, that local and regional groups across the state have been working for a long time to develop local broadband solutions and close the digital divide. And we are just honored with the partnership, the ongoing partnership that we have with you all to both collaborate and align efforts to achieve the aims of Broadband for All. Next slide. And just real quick, The aims of Broadband for All really acknowledge that broadband access, affordability, adoption, and digital literacy are critical components to digital equity. And the goals of Broadband for All were really called out in the Broadband Action Plan, and it's aligned around 3 long-term goals. The first of which is that all Californians have high-performance broadband available at home, schools, libraries, and businesses, that all Californians have access to affordable broadband and necessary devices, and that all Californians can access training and support to enable digital inclusion. And that completes my comments. I'd like to introduce the next speaker. It's my colleague and partner, Mark Monroe, the Deputy Director of the Middle Mile Broadband Initiative. Mark?
Yes, good morning, and thank you, Scott. Yes, I'm Mark Monroe. I'm the Deputy Director for the state's Middle Mile Broadband Initiative program. We welcome the opportunity to talk about the state's Middle Mile project here. We can kind of jump to the next slide. To create a backbone to support the last mile efforts that are being made, the SB 156 was passed, as Scott noted, in 2021, and it came with a Budget Act appropriation of $3.25 billion in federal funds. And this is really to create a statewide open access middle mile and a backbone for all those last mile efforts to connect to. The MMBI is intended to use a combination of construction and IRU leases along the state highway system to connect the state's unserved and underserved communities. And really the important partner there is Caltrans, where we do have the right of way for 15,000 miles of state highways. And so using Caltrans expertise in designing, permitting, and building projects really seemed like a good efficiency to help solve for that middle mile component, or most of that middle mile component. But at the same time, the funding that was provided, a lot is not enough, is not expected to be enough to build the whole thing. So there was also this idea in mind that we might need to use IR leases to help complete that full 10,000 mile need. CDT's identified 10,000 mile network that reaches the state's 700,000 unserved households, at least gets close to them along the state highway system. This took into used the data provided by the Public Utilities Commission relative to where unserved and underserved communities were, and then added in information from our third-party administrator, Golden State Net, regarding loop topology, ring topology rather, and resiliency. The $3.25 billion in federal ARPA funding must be under contract by 2024, and all the projects need to be completed by 2026. So a very tight time frame for developing a 10,000 mile public works process. But this middle mile network shown on the map here will support the last mile programs that last mile service providers are developing by providing an affordable statewide open access middle mile network for providers to connect to in serving the state's unserved and underserved communities. Next slide. All right, the timeline we see here reflects what the state has done so far and what it has planned relative to these federal 2024 and 2026 deadlines. CDT has worked with its partners to develop enhancements to the state's permitting process along the state highway system to accelerate going to construction. CDT and Caltrans have also gone out to contract for a range of solutions for MMBI network development, including construction, purchases, lease of existing infrastructure that I mentioned earlier through IRUs. These solutions are being evaluated currently as part of a broader network optimization process. The intent is to have a statewide middle mile backbone that can support all of the last mile efforts being developed here. That's really the end of my MMBI summary, and I'll turn it back to Cole.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Director Monroe and Deputy Director Adams. And before we move on to the local jurisdiction permitting playbook, I did want to open up the opportunity if there are any questions specific to the middle mile broadband network or broadband for all for Deputy Director Adams or Deputy Director Monroe. And if you are an attendee, you can go to the bottom and raise your hand and we can unmute you, or the Q&A option is also available. So I will pause for a few moments to allow the opportunity for any questions for both Mark Monroe or Scott Adams. Okay. Not seeing any. We can move on. And thank you, Deputy Director Monroe and Deputy Director Adams. Thank you for your updates. Let's go to the next slide. And we'll pass it off to the Senior Advisor of Governor's Office, Business and Economic Development, Kana Pereira. And Kana, looks like you're muted still. There you go.
Thank you, Cole, and thank you everybody for joining us. I'm really pleased to have another opportunity to share this permitting playbook and the revisions that have been included in this new version. So next slide, please. As you all know, permitting plays an extremely important role in the development and deployment of broadband within your communities and shared amongst your partner communities around you as well as in your consortia. So we know that the importance of readiness is going to be an extremely valuable piece for both funding, for both the ability to obtain funds and also to get the technical assistance you guys need in deploying these things once the middle mile gets deployed and in preparation for your last mile actions. So the playbook is built around building out proactive, back one, sorry. It's built around building some proactive strategies around enabling the permitting process to be implemented in a very smooth and regular manner. Its intent is to reduce the time value for deployment as well as to increase the transparency for the providers of the service. Next slide. Thank you. In producing this report, we collaborated with many different stakeholders, and you will need to collaborate with a number of different stakeholders as you deploy broadband within your communities. And the number of stakeholders are wide, and we were trying to assess all of the different, major players in this game and make sure that they have both the relevant information that is necessary to deploy within your territory, as well as you have the tools to be able to implement effectively. And so the idea around this playbook is to give you as many types of optionalities and as many types of ways for you to deploy the permitting process in the most effective way for your jurisdiction, but also to provide that transparency to the partners that you're going to have to use and work with. So with that, we're going to go into the full-on presentation of this new revision of the playbook, and we can go to the next slide. And with that, I'll go ahead and kick it back over to Cole Prisbilla.
Thank you, Kana. Appreciate it. So I'm Cole Prisbilla. I'm the Access and Deployment Advisor for Broadband at the Office of Broadband and Digital Literacy. And next slide. So like Deputy Director Adams mentioned, the Broadband for All plan has a specific call out as it relates to permitting, and that's action item 6. And the big piece here is that we are looking at ways that we can enhance the permitting processes at all levels of government. And so what we intended and what we have learned from both middle mile broadband network permitting and federal NEPA permitting, and then how do we kind of share this knowledge, but also reach out to local jurisdictions, broadband consortiums, and understand the needs at the local government level and tribal level to really share some smart practices. And so next slide, that's what we did. Through some extensive engagement with both city, counties, consortiums, and tribals leaders through both webinars, surveys, and individual outreach, we heard a resounding need for both permitting processes, understanding of Broadband 101, understanding the technical assistance side of where to start. And so next slide. What we kind of delivered here is a local jurisdiction permitting playbook that you can look at as a menu, as a checklist. So we do not anticipate this as a novel. All practices won't translate to all communities due to the uniqueness of all of our different local jurisdictions and our communities. And so look at it as a menu. And so with that, I am going to pass it over to Matt Lauer and finish with saying that this local jurisdiction permitting playbook is a tool for you to use as you see fit. Please share it, pass it to your local communities, pass it to those broadband experts in your communities, and use it in the ways that make sense for you. And Matt, off to you.
Thank you, Cole, and good morning, everybody. My name is Matt Lauer, and I'm with the Broadband Equity Partnership. I'm joined by two colleagues of mine today, Rudy Welter, who's our principal engineer, and Curtis Tiger, who's a senior analyst. The Broadband Equity Partnership is a mission-driven consultancy that's designed to help governments, nonprofits, and businesses innovate and close the digital divide across the country. It's powered by two different consulting firms, HR&A Advisors and CTC Technology and Energy, and we are from the latter. And we've been advisors to the Broadband for All program in the state of California. So can we go to the next slide, please, Cole? So this is the second roundtable to discuss the local permitting playbook. So just an update, if you weren't able to attend the first one, the local government permitting playbook is a menu of ideas or a toolkit, perhaps. And everything in this document belongs to the ecosystem. It's yours to use, it's yours to customize, and to build to meet your community's unique circumstances. And it's also a living document. We're always looking for more tools. This is a collaborative process, so we always welcome input, and it's always fun for us to get to know the different partners that we work with across the state. So go to the next slide, please, Cole. So the tools within our toolkit in this document really fall in three big buckets. The playbook talks about enhancing permitting processes, talks about how to facilitate and streamline access to assets. And it also talks about creating equitable access to information and policy transparency. There's also, at the end of the playbook, we discuss some approaches in which you may consider as you assemble the tools that are right for your community. Next slide, please, Cole. And so what we're going to talk about now are the two updates that were suggested at the last roundtable. The first update has to do with environmental impact reports in CEQA. I take it it's a safe bet that most people in this call have interacted with CEQA in some way, shape, or form before, but it is California's Environmental Quality Act. And CEQA has three basic levels of documentation. It certainly is more complex than this as you get into it, but we really want to talk about the third most intense level of documentation, the environmental impact report. And developing an environmental impact report is a lengthy process. And it's such a lengthy process that sometimes it represents a risk to your project timeline, particularly when working with federal funds. And this isn't a broadband issue, and this isn't even particularly unique to CEQA. Any state that has their own environmental quality documentation process similar to NEPA, we're running into these problems across the country with a variety of infrastructure deployments. What makes CEQA unique, though, is it does have a built-in solution to this problem, and that's called a Program Environmental Impact Report. You can go to the next slide, please, Cole. So a program EIR is really a preemptive environmental study, for lack of a better term. You can apply it to a series of actions that you can characterize as one large project. And the law gives some different examples of how you may characterize your broadband program as a large project. And so the long of the short is that individual projects that fall within the program can be evaluated against the program EIR. And if they're determined by your planning department or whomever manages your entitlements for broadband, if they're determined to be in scope, this program EIR, or your program EIR, I should say, can be applied as part of the approval of that particular project. And so I'd like to turn it over to Curtis now. We'll talk a little bit about the two examples that we've included for program EIR in the permitting playbook.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, just want to go further in depth on the two examples and start first with the image you see on the right, which is alluding to the Nevada County Broadband Program Draft Environmental Impact Report. The Nevada County Broadband Program allocated county funds towards a last mile broadband expansion to help residents and institutions connect to local network providers. But as a result of connecting fiber optic cables, of course, it triggers a potential environmental impact. So what Matt mentioned earlier in terms of CEQA, or the California Environmental Quality Act, the Environmental Impact Report is a compliance document. But in order to streamline that, in order to progress through this a bit quicker, the program EIR is what Nevada County Broadband Program initiated. So they utilize the bullets that you see up top to lump it all into one large project. So geography, contemplated actions, governance, same authority, and similar environmental effects. They utilize those bylaws or policy to streamline this process a bit quicker. So as a result, they produced a draft environmental report or program environmental impact report, which outlined evaluated environmental impacts, which could be aesthetics, archaeological or historical factors, biological factors, noise, water quality, air quality, things of that nature. So as a result, this was a process that was done through this county to get through CEQA in a more streamlined effort. Next one I want to talk about is Tuolumne County RFP. This county created an RFP to consult environmental services, consulting services from contractors. Within this RFP, the contractors or the county itself was looking for contractors to develop the program EIR, or Environmental Impact Report. So making sure that they're talking and then discussing and outlining in the document what is the project description, what are the environmental impacts and settings and the mitigation measures, the cultural resources or tribal cultural resources, air quality, greenhouse gases, things of that nature, to understand what are the environmental impacts and how are they going to be documented throughout this process. And it was also crucial about the Tuolumne County RFP is that they go into depth, of course, not only in terms of the metrics and hiring a consultant, but understanding the role of that consultant in addition to developing the report. So making sure that there's public comments, making sure that the contractor is involved in the facilitation and leadership of those public reviews. So these two programs are definitely beneficial and examples as to understanding the smart practice and streamlined effort. From here, I'll pass it to Rudy. I think you're still on mute.
You're on mute, Rudy. Cole, can you go to the next slide, please?
Sorry about. Yes, good morning, everybody. Microtrenching is a relatively new alternative to the conventional methods, construction methods of trenching and horizontal drilling. It is predominantly applied by last mile providers in urban settings where fiber conduits and fiber cables have to be placed on the paved areas like roads, sidewalks, or parking lots. In contrast to traditional construction methods like trenching, where utilities are typically placed about 3 to 4 feet below grade, microtrenches are shallow, only 1 to 2 feet deep and really narrow, maybe 1 to 2 inches wide, just wide enough to fit the conduits or the cables that have to be buried. There are several advantages associated with microtrenching. First of all, it's more economical than the alternatives. It is fast and clean. Some contractors allege that they can do about 3,000 feet per day and crew from starts to finish, which includes the trenching, removal all of the debris, laying the fiber, and then resurfacing the affected area. The picture on the slide is fairly typical for such construction scenarios. Quite often the conduits are put at the boundary of roads to a sidewalk. And the trench is really narrow. It also illustrates the vacuum process that goes along with the trenching. From a permitting perspective, there are probably some advantages as well, since the conduits are going to be placed in previously disturbed areas. There is much less concern of any environmental impact, so the process should be significantly shortened. Recognizing the benefits and the potential of expediting the deployment of broadband for all in California, the Senate Bill 357 was introduced in 2018 and ratified and signed by the governor the following year. This bill basically mandates that all local jurisdictions allow microtrenching, and they specify what the microtrench actually is. They indicate a depth up to 26 inches below grade and up to 4 inches wide, which is quite general. It does not supersede any existing local jurisdiction mandates or rules or regulations, but it does mandate that microtrenching be allowed with few exceptions, such as, for instance, public health or public safety concerns. So many local municipalities and cities have embraced this concept and have built some code, made some code changes to their public works documentation. Some of them have not. Obviously, a lot of it has to do with familiarity. Unless there is a driving force to look at microtrenching, the new method is basically left to the side. Los Angeles County is probably the best known county and area that has embraced the microtrenching method as a viable solution. They are also known for well publicized and well specified standards for their process. There's a number of other cities and communities that are known for having done some successful deployment with microtrenching. Fullerton is probably the best known. It's a microtrenched fiber infrastructure that reaches just about every household. Loma Linda is one that looked at fiber deployment early on, before microtrenching actually was a common household name, and found that it was cost prohibitive at that time, just looking at typical and standard trenching and horizontal drilling. When microtrenching became available, they found a way to do that. It has not been deployed citywide, but it's a demonstration that microtrenching has economic viability. With that, I'll give it back to Cole.
Hey, thank you, Matt, Curtis, and Rudy. And again, I think one of the things that I wanted to reiterate is that the local jurisdiction permitting playbook are smart practices. They're recommendations. There's zero guidance. There's zero, this is the way it has to be. This is all about, here are ideas, concepts, things that are being done across the state, or in some cases across the country, and how you can incorporate them into your local community. And so one of the things that I really like about the local jurisdiction permitting playbook is it's not just information. I come from the County of Tuolumne in an economic development setting, and was working on broadband roadmaps and understanding how to bring it to our community. And this is what I kind of dreamed of, which was like, here's all the different things that we could consider. And then here are examples. And that's what I love about the program EIRs. Not only do you have an example of a almost complete one, because it's out into draft for public comment, but then you also have a draft or an RFP that's already been put out to find your own resources to do a program EIR. And so we left a hearty amount of time, about 30 minutes for Q&A and for questions. The things that I want to share preemptively, as I know some of these will happen in the questions. The recording will get posted on the Broadband for All portal. The presentation will be on the Broadband for All portal as well as the updated January 2023 version 2 of the local jurisdiction permitting playbook with microtrenchings and program EIR added. There was a presentation that is on the Broadband for All portal back from October that has a lot more of general information as well as more and other policies that we kind of highlighted, but we wanted to make sure we highlighted the 2 new incorporated and requested by you ideas or concepts that would be of benefit of adding to local jurisdiction permitting playbook. So opening up the Q&A, love to hear any questions you have in general, any questions specific as it relates to microtrenching or program EIRs, because we have the subject matter experts here from CTC Energy, as well as ideas or concepts that need to be added, removed to the local jurisdiction permitting playbook going forward, because that's why we're here today. We heard you and we moved forward. So I am going to open up and offer the opportunity for questions. You can go about it in 2 ways. There's the raise your hand feature and the Q&A feature too, if you don't want to do it vocally. Oh, don't make me call on you. I know names out in this attendee list. In the meantime, while you're thinking of your here we go. Perfect. I will save my in the meantime. So Art, you can now unmute, and I'm going to try to say your last name, Art Vaughtlin.
Yeah, you got it. It's Art Vaughtlin, City of Rose.
Perfect.
Yeah, I have a question about microtrenching. You know, our public works department sometimes needs to replace streets, and I know kind of based on, you know, the lifespan of a street and the lifespan of fiber, how does that work out in terms of who's responsible for, like if, let's say somebody microtrenches through a street that's going to be, you know, replaced all the way down in 5 years, so that they cross this one street that is going to be replaced. Is that on the municipality to pay for the damage or the what's going to happen to the fiber, or is that on the carrier? How is that all handled?
It's probably handled on a case-by-case basis. I would imagine that the city would have to pay for the retrenching of the fiber. Fiber material itself is basically nothing. It's really the work. And but that is something that is up to the municipality as to how they want to handle it. If you have a project in mind that is, let's say, maybe 5 years out, that is something that would have to be conveyed when the permitting process is ongoing, and the facility or the ISP would need to know that so that they can evaluate their options.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
I can add to that quickly here. So that's one of the things that we've considered in the permitting playbook. And so thinking about, again, the solution is community or municipality or locality driven, but one of the things to consider would be incorporating fiber optic build out, or really utility build out that might not be city owned utilities, as part of a broader capital improvements plan as well. So we talked a little bit about in the permitting playbook, some strategies that might help you make the right decision when you're doing your capital improvement planning and things like that. So.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Art, for your question. Art, it looks like maybe it was an accident, but here, oh, there you go. Perfect. All right.
Oh, wait, I got it. Sorry about that.
No problem. I just want to make sure you didn't have a follow-up. So we did have a couple questions, Rudy and Matt, since you're still up. In terms of, and Bill Bain, who asked a question, if I get the question wrong, please help me out. But in terms of horizontal boring costs in no surface disturbance, do you have any understanding or advice on how much it potentially would cost for horizontal boring with no surface disturbance?
Well, yes, we do, and it's a range. And when we say no surface disturbance, it might be somewhat a misnomer. If you build it within the paved right of way, you will have to make drill holes or pit holes every so often, let's say every 300 feet or so. So there is some pavement or repavement that will be required. The range for, let's say, per foot cost for drilling ranges from, let's say, about $28 to $115, depending on what the substrate looks like. And it depends on whether or not it's soil, whether or not it has cobbles, stones, boulders. And if worst case would be a hard rock that they have to drill through. So it's difficult to say what the average is. It's probably on the lower side. I would say somewhere in the $30 to $50 range would be about appropriate.
Perfect. Thank you, Rudy. And Bill, you have the opportunity to unmute if there's any follow-up questions that you might have. I'll give you an opportunity.
Yeah, my only question would be, how does that compare with the micro trenching in terms of cost?
Again, that is a range, and it probably depends what kind of contractor you're talking to and where. I have seen numbers from $12 to about $18 per foot. That would include the resurfacing, which is basically a minor component of the whole thing.
Does that help, Bill?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. And so here's another question, and this one's probably a bit of me, and then Maria, we might have to follow up and make sure that we get you the right information. The question is, for programmatic EIRs, if it's going to be paid through LATA, which is the Local Agency Technical Assistance Program for last mile funding through CPUC, is there an approved vendor list? Maria, do not have that specific answer for you, but if you sent me an email, we could definitely get you an answer and definitely connect you directly to the CPUC who would have that answer. My understanding as it relates to some of the other local jurisdictions that are using LATA, I think as part of their LATA grant, they went out for an RFQ. So the specific example I'm thinking of didn't actually use a vendor list. So send me an email, we'll follow up with the CPUC and get you a real answer. And then Martha, I am going to go ahead and unmute. You can now unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I just wanted to follow up. Bill Bain is a civil engineer that's been a city engineer in the Inland Empire for many years. And so we're part of the Inland Empire Regional Broadband Consortium. And so I just wanted to follow up on his question about the horizontal work. I think that ought to be in the playbook, because there are applications when you're going across a very busy street with a lot of traffic lanes and a lot of traffic control, that it may be cost effective to make that an idea for local jurisdictions to include when they're doing their permitting. Like maybe it's a combination of microtrenching, maybe a project is a combination of various kinds of technology to help get the project through, because you may end up spending more on traffic control than and safety than without that as an option. So I wanted to see that added in as a potential. And then also the way it really works from what our understanding is and experience is that the city and county engineers are basically doing encroachment permits, or planning department is approving towers with aesthetic concerns and so forth. So I didn't see anything about towers and fixed wireless, about anything about the planning department. Besides, I understood the programmatic EIR concept, but as far as being able to get around the issues of, or to not get around, but to include the issues of aesthetics for fixed wireless and towers. So those were, so the one comment was to add in the horizontal application. The other is to look at how the planning department and the public works department, because there's different types of permitting. There's,
Yep.
you know, like a conditional use permit versus there's a encroachment permits. So I just wanted to kind of flesh that out. And then this is really the private sector coming in and getting permits. And then you're addressing the option of when you do your own capital improvement projects to include some of this in your own projects. And usually that's at your own cost unless you're working with a provider. So that was just some input. Thank you.
Martha, that was, I caught three great things that you just shared. One, which was something to include, which is about horizontal drilling. I heard actually a second potential inclusion in the local jurisdiction permitting playbook, which is general types of permits. And I like that kind of the differentiation between encroachment permits and other types of permits that could be as it relates to broadband deployment. I also want to acknowledge that I think your read of the local jurisdiction permitting playbook is very on point in terms of there is a slight bend towards physical infrastructure in the ground as it relates to kind of broadband fiber deployment. But there is a particular in me coming from the county of Tuolumne and living in Central Sierra and understanding that fiber is not always the best case or even the only option. So totally understand. And I think we can relate to what are other considerations as it relates to broadband permitting if it's from other ways to deploy, be it aerial, be it satellite and towers. So totally understand that.
Thank you. And when you really look at the towers, it's really a standalone issue in many cases because it's going through a different kind of permitting
Right.
at the local jurisdiction. We've seen them take between 2 and 7 years to get approvals, which is really not great when you're dealing with technology, which means there needs to be and planning departments have done a really good job at a local level of figuring out what they will approve, but it's not streamlined throughout the state. And so I just want to add one other item, and it's about CEQA. The programmatic EIR is really a great idea. It's expensive and it has to cover a lot of issues so that then you can move forward. And it looks like the approach is sort of county by county. So I want to add these two comments in. The county does not speak for the cities. So the city would tend to either adopt what the county does because they were considered as part of the county, or you have to be careful that the county isn't just looking at unincorporated areas, because sometimes they really do just look at their own jurisdiction and they let the cities do what the cities need to do. So that needs to be sort of coordinated. Is it a programmatic EIR for who, for what actual jurisdictions? And then I'm going to posit this. There is a real need to consider a categorical exemption category put into CEQA versus a bunch of programmatic EIRs. I'm not saying the programmatic EIR doesn't have value. It isn't really a great tool in CEQA. But when you look at the Public Utilities Commission, they have gotten category exemptions for utility work. I would like to see some discussion or some work in the playbook on looking at this as a CEQA, like if you aren't bothering anything, could you get a CEQA exemption and not go through any of this?
I'm smiling because this team over here, we've been talking about categorical exclusions. And so I just feel very connected to what you're saying. I like the idea. I mean, SB 156 put in CEQA exemptions for the middle mile broadband network. And we've had conversations on how does that work within the last mile? How could it work within the last mile? How could we bring something similar? So I don't have an answer for you, but I like the way you're thinking and want to mirror and echo that. I think categorical exclusions and conversations about categorical exclusions is a great idea. And also that you are absolutely correct. A program EIR from a county level may not, unless adopted by the city, work together. And so there might be a conversation, are they separate program EIRs or are they a joint program EIR and how do they work together? Matt, Rudy, do you have any corrections into what I said about program EIRs between cities and counties, or is that?
No, that
Okay.
makes sense. In the Nevada County Broadband Program, it was specifying incorporated and unincorporated, so they definitely acknowledged certain differences. But of course, the goal, of course, is to install fiber throughout the county. So, you know, we hope for cooperation and partnership on both sides to achieve that. So
did it actually include the cities, or is it something they still have to adopt?
so they acknowledged the cities that were included within the county, but they didn't include the cities on whether they were going to adopt it, from my understanding. So
Okay, that's super important for this
mhm.
for this conversation. So thank you for clarifying. And I just want to use the terminology on pursuing the categorical exemption under CEQA. There is a pathway for that because CEQA gets amended on a regular basis, not often, but there are intervals where there are CEQA updates and categorical exemptions could even be done as a standalone, as you pointed out, the middle mile. So there are two pathways, a standalone legislation or be part of the ongoing CEQA update that does happen on some level of interval. The thing about CEQA is it's a categorical exemption. Categorical exclusion is under NEPA. When you get a categorical exclusion under NEPA, you usually have to do special studies to confirm you're a categorical exclusion. Under California CEQA, once you're categorically exempt and you fit into the category, you don't need to do special studies. Special studies would move you up to an initial study for an environmental, for a mitigated negative deck or a negative deck. A EA is where you go on the NEPA side. So they're really in the playbook. There ought to be some consideration because on a federal highway, you're going to be looking at NEPA.
Right.
On a state highway, you're going to be looking at, you know, a local road. And also, I want to add one more thing. You're going to be looking at funding source if it's your own project of what funded something, of determines if it's CEQA or NEPA. But that categorical exemption is a lot different. In essence, it's similar to the NEPA categorical exclusion, but it's not the same. It's actually super streamlined once it's in the document. Thank you.
Yep. No, those are all great, Martha. I truly appreciate some of the things that you're sharing. And I think what we'll do is we'll take it back and figure out how can we bring in categorical exclusions versus exemptions, and then how it all relates to both CEQA and NEPA. I think those are some things that could be of value and of good information sharing for those that don't know what we're saying when we say exclusions versus exemptions and how it all works together with CEQA and NEPA. So.
And I'm gonna end my comments because I don't want to dominate or, you know, well, sorry. But I just wanted to say that the local planning offices are very good resources for this at the county and the city level to get them in on this conversation. They do it every day. They understand it. The other part of this is what Bill brought up about the cost. I'm even concerned about everybody doing their own program EIR if you couldn't take a model and give it a statewide approach or the categorical exclusion approach. It is very expensive to take all the cities, all the counties, and have them do all this planning. It's millions of dollars. It's a lot of consulting work and it takes a long time. So even though it's a really good model, there has to be funding or they won't happen, or there has to be, like there's a similar program in the governor's office about LEAP program and other types of planning where similar to the LATA, but it's not saying you have to end up with viable projects. It's saying we're going to let you do planning to set the table to get viable projects, which is kind of where LATA is supposed to be. But there's a lot of stuff in LATA that doesn't, it's not a one size fits all planning grant. It's got some technical things in it that may not fit every jurisdiction. And there's also some issues with how the contracting goes because most of the jurisdictions that it's reaching out to, they need to do RFPs and go through their procurement process. And there's some issues that we found that the PUC is wanting them to have people on board before they get the grant, which is a timing issue for how they do procurement. So it's not a one size fits all. But we are looking at programmatic EIRs for everyone potentially. So thank you.
No, totally right. And the fact that everything is not one size fit all, and that's, I think, specifically why we call the local jurisdiction permitting playbook a menu or a checklist of potential smart strategies that could be employed in your community, understanding that not all of them fit due to the uniqueness of each community. And actually goes to the next question that was in the Q&A. It's a little bit longer than I would kind of all speak out, but the fact is that they put together a community nonprofit to start to work with San Benito County on broadband and broadband access, and especially as it relates to the rural unserved and their kind of larger or their varied terrain and their small population. And so one of the things, the question there is there a possibility of some administrative help to coordinate the development and communication with Broadband for All? So Phil, I would urge you to send us an email. We can get you in touch with potential funding opportunities. I'd give you and send out a link to everyone, including yourself. If you look at the Broadband for All portal on the resource the partners page, there is a funding page specific to finding funding across the different jurisdictions with, are you looking for deployment? Are you looking for adoption? Are you looking for equity dollars? So there are lots of opportunities on the Broadband for All portal. And then additionally, ways that we can help and coordinate in the future. So let's get connected, Philip. Definitely send us an email. And if let me pull up the chat, we can put an email into the chat as well. I'm going to put the link to the Broadband for All page as well. Finally, it looks like we have one other question in the Q&A regarding the positive and negatives of microtrenching in rural areas, with a specific question to my understanding of Tuolumne County. And my answer is I don't know. We never got to that point of kind of conversations, and I definitely don't want to speak on their behalf for the benefits or negatives of both microtrenching, and especially as it relates to our county. So I'm going to pause. We have 6 more minutes, so definitely have time for one more question or two if there is any. There is an email address to send a email out. I was going to put in my personal state email, but I'm going to be out for the next 4 weeks. I just welcomed my 3rd son into the world on Sunday, so I'm going to be headed out after this. So I definitely want your emails to get seen and read and answered. Okay. I'm not seeing any more questions. What I would ask is that when we send out a follow-up email to all those that attended and registered, that you take the opportunity to look at the version 2 of the local jurisdiction permitting playbook and reach out exactly like we just did, which was send us your thoughts, send us, are there any issues, and send us what's missing. Because as you can see, there are people back here on this side reading what you're saying and incorporating and sending out answers and delivering that information as it specifically rates on this time for program EIRs and microtrenching. I'd love to be able to find ways to incorporate, Martha, your ideas and Bill and Art, your ideas into the local jurisdiction permitting playbook. I would be remiss to say that this local jurisdiction permitting playbook was developed in a vacuum. It was not. It had tons of state partners that we need to thank, including the California Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, California Public Utilities Commissions, and many other state agencies, including our state partners like the California Emerging Technology Fund, California Forward, California State Association of Counties, Rural County Representatives of California, California Cities. So tons of state partners not only helped us send out the survey, but also connect directly with their members, share this information, and share comments with the local jurisdiction permitting playbook. That was a lot. I look forward to sharing this information. I think there's one more slide that you will see. There is some additional information that we'll send, both about the planning resources of where you can find the California local jurisdiction permitting playbook, on the Broadband for All portal. It is the version 1 with this webinar and the email to you. The version 2 will go public. And then finally, you can find a link to the draft impact environmental report from Nevada County if you want to look into that some more. With that, I want to say thank you. And we look forward to you joining us next quarter with an update to the local jurisdiction permitting playbook and an opportunity to ask more questions. But in the meantime, please feel free to reach out to that Broadband for All at state.ca.gov. Send us any questions that you have, any ideas, any thoughts, or respond to the follow-up email from this webinar. So I want to say thank you again. Thank you, Governor's Office Business and Economic Development for hosting this webinar. Thank you to Deputy Director Scott Adams, Deputy Director Mark Monroe, Senior Advisor for Governors GoBiz, Kind Pereira, and the CTC Energy team's outstanding conversation. And I appreciate y'all. Thank you.